In the prestigious Willowbrook Gardens wedding venue, a 68-year-old grandmother was about to discover that family loyalty had a price tag she never knew existed. What started as her beloved son's dream wedding turned into a calculated scheme to humiliate her into surrendering the family property that had been her life's work. I'm Sophia Martinez, and I never imagined that the woman my son chose to marry would orchestrate my public embarrassment as part of a larger plan to steal everything I'd built. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Jessica's sweet smile and perfect manners had fooled everyone, but I'd spent 40 years as a small business owner reading people's true intentions. When I found myself seated behind the kitchen at my own son's wedding, I realized this wasn't about seating arrangements. This was about power, control, and a family empire worth over $2 million. What happened next would expose years of manipulation and prove that sometimes the most dangerous enemies are the ones who call you family. The morning of David's wedding dawned crisp and clear in Riverside, California, the kind of perfect October day that makes you believe in fairy tale endings. I stood in my bedroom, carefully hanging the emerald green dress I'd chosen for my son's special day, my hands trembling slightly with excitement rather than age. After raising David as a single mother following my husband's death 12 years ago, seeing him find love felt like the completion of a chapter I'd written with sacrifice, determination, and unconditional devotion. My reflection in the antique mirror showed a woman who'd weathered storms but emerged stronger. At 68, I still carried myself with the confidence that came from building Martinez Construction from nothing into one of Riverside's most respected contracting businesses. The calluses on my hands told stories of early mornings on job sites, of learning to operate machinery when other women my age were joining book clubs, of proving that determination mattered more than gender in an industry dominated by men. The house around me stood as testament to that success. The Spanish colonial revival I'd designed and built with my own crew wasn't just a home. It was the headquarters of an empire that employed 37 people and had transformed Riverside's downtown district. Every beam, every tile, every carefully crafted archway represented years of 18-hour days and the unwavering belief that I could provide David with a life better than the poverty we'd escaped. This morning, however, my thoughts weren't on business ledgers or construction schedules. They were on my son, the brilliant young man who'd inherited his father's gentle heart and my stubborn determination. David had chosen well with Jessica, or so I'd believed for the past 2 years. She was educated, articulate, and seemed genuinely devoted to making him happy. The fact that she came from money had never bothered me. I'd worked too hard to begrudge anyone their advantages. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Mom, can't wait to see you today. Thank you for everything you've done to make this possible. Love you." The message brought tears to my eyes as I remembered the conversation we'd had 6 months ago when he'd asked me to host the reception at the family estate. Jessica's parents offered to pay for everything, he'd said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table where we'd shared so many important conversations. "But she really wants it here, Mom. She says there's something magical about the gardens you created, about the history of what you built." I'd been touched by Jessica's apparent appreciation for the legacy I'd created. The 5-acre property with its meticulously landscaped gardens, the restored carriage house that served as an event space, and the main house that had been featured in Architectural Digest all represented the tangible proof of dreams realized through hard work. Hosting David's wedding here felt like the perfect way to celebrate not just his future, but the foundation I'd built for our family's success. The wedding preparations had consumed the last 3 months of my life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I'd personally overseen every detail, from the hand-forged iron arbor where they'd exchange vows, to the vintage chandeliers installed in the carriage house for the reception. My construction crew had worked evenings and weekends to ensure everything was perfect, treating David's wedding like the most important project we'd ever undertaken. Jessica had been involved in every decision, her enthusiasm apparent as we selected flowers, tasted catering options, and coordinated with vendors. She'd seemed genuinely grateful for my efforts, often commenting on how lucky David was to have such a devoted mother. Her frequent visits to the house had become routine, and I'd grown fond of our afternoon conversations over coffee in the sunroom overlooking the gardens. There had been small moments that puzzled me, comments that seemed slightly off, or questions that felt unnecessarily probing. Jessica's interest in the business details of Martinez construction had seemed natural for someone marrying into the family. Her questions about property values, estate planning, and my long-term business intentions had felt like the responsible inquiries of a future daughter-in-law who wanted to understand the family's financial situation. "Sophia, you've built something incredible here," she'd said during one of our planning sessions. "It must be overwhelming sometimes, managing all of this responsibility alone. Have you ever thought about simplifying, maybe selling some of the properties, and enjoying a more relaxed retirement?" I'd laughed off the suggestion, explaining that Martinez Construction wasn't just a business to me, it was a legacy I intended to pass down to David and the grandchildren I hoped would someday run through these same gardens. Jessica had smiled and nodded, but something in her eyes had seemed calculating rather than understanding. The wedding guest list had been another source of minor tension. Jessica's family and friends comprised nearly 2/3 of the invited guests, which seemed natural given their social connections and large extended family. What had surprised me was her insistence that certain people from my side be excluded from the main reception area. "The caterers need adequate space for service," she'd explained when I questioned the seating arrangements. "Some of the older relatives might be more comfortable in quieter areas where they won't be disturbed by the music and dancing." The logic had seemed sound at the time, especially coming from someone with Jessica's event planning experience. Her mother had organized countless charity galas and social functions, so I deferred to their expertise in matters of wedding etiquette and crowd management. As I applied my makeup that morning, I felt a mixture of pride and anticipation. The woman in the mirror had overcome poverty, discrimination, and personal tragedy to create something lasting and meaningful. Today would mark the beginning of a new chapter where David would take on greater responsibility in the family business, hopefully with Jessica as a supportive partner who appreciated the legacy we'd built together. The emerald dress fit perfectly, its classic lines flattering my still strong frame. I'd chosen the color because it complemented the garden's autumn foliage, and because emerald had been my husband Roberto's favorite color. He would have been so proud to see David on his wedding day, so grateful that our son had found someone who seemed to value family and tradition. A knock at my bedroom door interrupted my preparations. "Mrs. Martinez?" called Carmen, my longtime housekeeper and friend who'd been helping with wedding preparations for weeks. "The catering staff wants to review the final serving arrangements with you." I found the catering team leader Michelle waiting in the kitchen with her tablet and carefully organized charts. She was a consummate professional whom I'd worked with on several corporate events for Martinez Construction. Her attention to detail and ability to manage complex logistics had made her my first choice for David's wedding. "Sophia, I wanted to double-check something with you," Michelle said, her expression slightly puzzled. "The seating arrangements we received show you positioned at table 47, which is behind the service kitchen. That seems unusual for the mother of the groom. Did you specifically request that location?" Her question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the overall event planning that I'd left the specific seating arrangements to Jessica, trusting her judgment about optimal guest placement and family dynamics. The idea that I'd been assigned to a table behind the kitchen seemed absurd. "There must be some mistake," I replied, reaching for the seating chart Michelle offered. "I'm sure Jessica intended for me to be at the family table near the head table." As I studied the chart, my confusion deepened. Not only was I seated behind the kitchen, but I was positioned with distant relatives and family friends I barely knew, while Jessica's extended family occupied the prime tables closest to the bridal party. My brother Miguel, who'd flown in from Texas specifically for the wedding, was seated at a table near the back corner of the reception hall. "This has to be an error," I murmured, but something cold was settling in my stomach. The placement felt too deliberate to be a simple mistake, too calculated to be an oversight. Michelle nodded sympathetically. "I've planned hundreds of weddings, and I've never seen the groom's mother seated behind the service area. Would you like me to contact Jessica about correcting this?" Before I could respond, David appeared in the kitchen doorway, resplendent in his custom tuxedo, his face glowing with happiness. The sight of him on his wedding day momentarily pushed aside my concerns about seating arrangements. This was his day, and nothing should overshadow his joy. "Mom, you look absolutely beautiful," he said, crossing the kitchen to embrace me. "Thank you for making everything so perfect. Jessica keeps saying this is like a fairy tale come true." I decided not to mention the seating confusion, at least not until after the ceremony. Whatever miscommunication had occurred could be resolved without casting a shadow over David's happiness. Perhaps Jessica had intended for me to circulate freely during the reception rather than being confined to one table, and the chart simply reflected a placeholder position. The ceremony itself was everything I'd dreamed it would be. David and Jessica exchanged vows beneath the iron arbor I'd commissioned specifically for this moment, surrounded by the gardens I'd spent years cultivating. The autumn flowers created a perfect backdrop, and the golden light filtering through the oak trees gave the entire scene an ethereal quality. As I watched my son promise to love and honor the woman beside him, I felt the familiar tightness in my chest that came with overwhelming emotion. Roberto should have been here to see this moment, to walk David down the aisle and offer the father's blessing that would have meant everything to our son. Instead, it fell to me to represent both parents, to carry the weight of family history and tradition. Jessica looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace gown, her smile brilliant as she gazed up at David. During their first kiss as husband and wife, I found myself crying tears of joy and relief. Whatever minor issues had arisen during the planning process seemed insignificant compared to the obvious love between these two young people. The photographer captured family photos after the ceremony, and I noticed Jessica's efficiency in organizing the various groupings. She seemed to have a clear vision of which combinations were important, directing people with the confidence of someone accustomed to managing social events. When it came time for photos with my side of the family, however, the session felt rushed, almost perfunctory. "We need to keep moving to stay on schedule," Jessica explained, when I suggested additional shots with David and my brother Miguel. "The catering team needs us to transition to the reception area on time." Her concern for logistics seemed reasonable, even admirable. Planning an event of this magnitude required careful timing and attention to detail. I was proud that David had chosen someone so organized and capable, someone who could help him navigate the social and business obligations that came with being part of the Martinez family legacy. The cocktail hour proceeded smoothly, with guests mingling in the gardens while servers circulated with appetizers and champagne. I moved through the crowd, greeting relatives I hadn't seen in years, and introducing myself to Jessica's extensive network of family and friends. The Priesti's conversations were pleasant, though I noticed that Jessica's relatives seemed unusually interested in the details of the property and my business operations. "Sophia, this estate is absolutely stunning," commented Jessica's Aunt Patricia, a sophisticated woman who'd introduced herself as a real estate developer from San Francisco. "The location alone must be worth a fortune. Have you ever considered the commercial development potential of this area?" The question struck me as odd for a wedding reception conversation, but I attributed it to professional curiosity. People in real estate were naturally observant about property values and development opportunities. I politely deflected the inquiry, explaining that the estate was my family's legacy rather than a commercial investment. Similar conversations occurred throughout the cocktail hour. Jessica's family members and friends seemed remarkably well informed about Riverside's commercial real estate market, about recent zoning changes in our neighborhood, and about the expansion plans for the downtown district where Martinez Construction had several ongoing projects. Their questions felt more like a business assessment than casual social conversation. When the reception coordinator announced that dinner would be served, I looked forward to finally relaxing and enjoying the celebration. The months of preparation had been exhausting, and I was eager to sit down with family and friends to toast David and Jessica's future together. Following the flow of guests into the reception hall, I searched for table 47, still assuming that the seating chart error would be obvious once I saw the actual layout. The main reception area was beautifully appointed, with round tables covered in ivory linens and centerpieces of autumn flowers that complemented the garden setting perfectly. The head table, where David and Jessica would sit with their wedding party, occupied the prime position at the front of the room. Surrounding it were tables clearly designated for immediate family and closest friends, all positioned to provide optimal views of the couple and easy access for toasts and speeches. As I moved deeper into the reception hall following the table numbers, I realized with growing disbelief that I was indeed being directed toward the back of the room. Table 47 was not just behind the kitchen, it was tucked into an alcove that was partially hidden from the main reception area, positioned where servers would be constantly passing back and forth with trays and equipment. The table was set for 8 people, but only 5 chairs were occupied when I arrived. I recognized Maria Santos, my elderly neighbor who'd been like a surrogate grandmother to David, and her husband Carlos. Seated with them were 2 couples I'd met briefly during the engagement party but couldn't name, and an empty chair that was apparently mine. "Sophia, Misha," Maria said as I approached, her weathered face showing confusion and concern. "Are we in the right place? This seems like where they put the help, not the family." The blunt assessment confirmed what I'd been trying to deny. This wasn't a seating error or a logistical necessity. This was a deliberate placement that relegated me, the mother of the groom and hostess of this entire event, to a position of insignificance and disrespect. From my seat, I could barely see the head table through the constant movement of catering staff. The acoustics in this corner were terrible, making it difficult to hear the conversations and toasts that were already beginning at the main tables. Most significantly, the positioning made it clear that I was not intended to participate meaningfully in my own son's wedding reception. As I sat in the uncomfortable chair, watching servers navigate around our table with increasing frequency, the full scope of what was happening began to crystallize. This wasn't about event logistics or space management. This was about establishing a hierarchy that positioned me as peripheral to David and Jessica's future, a relic from his past rather than a central figure in their shared life going forward. The woman I'd welcomed into my family, whom I'd trusted with the intimate details of my business and personal life, had orchestrated this public humiliation with surgical precision. Every conversation about seating arrangements, every discussion about family dynamics, every seemingly innocent question about my plans for retirement had been building toward this moment of calculated disrespect. Maria leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Sophia, this is wrong. You should be sitting with your son, not hidden back here like you're ashamed of something." Her words ignited something fierce and familiar in my chest, the same feeling I'd experienced 30 years ago when a contractor had tried to cheat me out of payment because I was a woman, or when a city council member had suggested I wasn't qualified to bid on municipal projects because I lacked experience. It was the feeling that preceded every major battle I'd won in building Martinez Construction into what it was today. I was not going to sit quietly in the corner while someone attempted to diminish my role in my own son's life. I had not spent 4 decades building a legacy and a business empire to be relegated to the children's table at my own event. Most importantly, I was not going to allow David to begin his marriage under the influence of someone who would treat his mother with such calculated disrespect. Standing up from the uncomfortable chair, I smoothed my emerald dress and checked my reflection in the polished surface of a serving tray. The woman looking back at me was the same one who'd faced down discriminatory contractors, demanding city officials, and countless other challenges that had tried to break her spirit over the years. Maria grabbed my hand as I prepared to leave the table. "What are you going to do, Misha?" I smiled at her with the same confidence I'd shown to skeptical investors and doubtful employees throughout my career. "I'm going to remind everyone exactly who built this empire and who makes the decisions about its future." The time for quiet dignity and polite acceptance had passed. Jessica had made a serious miscalculation in believing that age and gender would make me an easy target for manipulation and disrespect. She was about to learn that the woman who'd built Martinez Construction from nothing was not someone who could be quietly pushed aside, especially not in her own home, at her own son's wedding, in front of her own family and friends. As I walked toward the head table, my heels clicking decisively on the polished floor, I could feel the energy in the room beginning to shift. Conversations were pausing as people noticed my purposeful movement through the reception hall. The background music seemed to fade as my presence commanded attention from guests who were beginning to sense that something significant was about to happen. This was my house. This was my business. This was my son. And it was time for everyone present to understand exactly where the power resided in this family and what happened to people who mistook kindness for weakness. Walking toward the head table with measured steps, I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had carried me through countless business negotiations and construction site confrontations. The conversations around me grew quieter as guests sensed something was about to happen, but I wasn't ready to make my move yet. I needed to understand the full scope of what Jessica had orchestrated before I responded. David looked up as I approached, his face lighting up with the same smile that had melted my heart since he was a toddler. "Mom, how's everything going? Are you enjoying yourself?" The innocent question nearly broke my resolve. My son had no idea that his new wife had deliberately humiliated his mother at their own wedding. He was radiating happiness, completely oblivious to the calculated disrespect that had been woven into every detail of this celebration. "Everything is lovely, sweetheart," I replied, forcing warmth into my voice while my eyes studied Jessica's face. "I just wanted to congratulate you both again and make sure you're having the perfect day." Jessica's smile was radiant, but something flickered in her eyes when they met mine. For just a moment, I caught a glimpse of satisfaction that went beyond bridal joy. She knew exactly what she'd done with the seating arrangements, and she was pleased with the result. "Sophia, you've outdone yourself," Jessica said, her voice carrying the perfect note of grateful daughter-in-law. "Everything is absolutely magical. David and I are so grateful for all the work you put into making our day special." The words were flawless, but the delivery felt rehearsed. I'd heard similar performances during business meetings when contractors tried to distract me from contract violations with excessive praise and gratitude. Jessica was performing for David's benefit, not expressing genuine appreciation. "I'm so glad you're happy with everything," I replied, watching carefully for any crack in her facade. I noticed there might have been some confusion with the seating arrangements. I seemed to be placed behind the kitchen area. David's expression immediately shifted to concern. "What? That can't be right. Mom, you should be sitting right here with us, or at least at the family table." Jessica's hand moved quickly to David's arm, her touch gentle but possessive. "Oh, sweetheart, remember we talked about this. Your mother specifically asked to be seated where she could easily oversee the catering operations and make sure everything ran smoothly. She wanted to be hands-on with the event management." The lie was delivered so smoothly, with such apparent sincerity, that for a moment even I questioned my own memory. But I knew with absolute certainty that I had never made such a request. The realization that Jessica was actively lying to my son, manipulating him in real time, ignited a cold fury in my chest. "I don't recall making that request," I said carefully, watching David's face as confusion replaced concern. "Maybe there was a miscommunication," Jessica continued, her smile never wavering. "Wedding planning can be so overwhelming with all the details. I'm sure we can sort it out if you'd prefer a different table." She was offering me an escape route, a way to save face while accepting her narrative about miscommunication. The gesture might have seemed generous to an observer, but I recognized it as another manipulation tactic. By graciously offering to fix the problem she'd created, Jessica would appear considerate while reinforcing the impression that I was confused or forgetful. "That's very thoughtful of you," I replied, my tone neutral. "Let me think about it." As I walked away from the head table, my mind was racing through the implications of what I'd just witnessed. Jessica hadn't just relegated me to an inferior position. She'd constructed a narrative that made my displacement seem like my own choice. If I complained about the seating arrangements, I would appear ungrateful for her offer to accommodate my supposed preferences. The level of manipulation was sophisticated, suggesting this wasn't a spontaneous act of disrespect, but a calculated strategy. Someone had invested considerable thought in how to diminish my role while maintaining plausible deniability. The question was whether this was Jessica's individual initiative or part of a larger plan involving her family. Returning to table 47, I found Maria and Carlos deep in conversation with the other guests. Their expressions were troubled, and their voices carried the hushed tones of people discussing something disturbing. "Sophia," Maria said as I rejoined them, "we've been talking, and something doesn't feel right about this whole situation." Carlos nodded gravely. "I've been to a lot of weddings in my 73 years, and I've never seen a mother of the groom treated like this. It's disrespectful, especially considering this is your home and your money paying for everything." One of the other guests, a woman named Elena, whom I'd met briefly at the engagement party, leaned forward conspiratorially. I couldn't help but overhear some conversations during cocktail hour. Jessica's family seems very interested in your business and your property. They were asking detailed questions about valuations and development potential. The confirmation of my earlier observations sent a chill through me. Elena continued. My husband works in real estate development, so I know the kinds of questions investors ask when they're evaluating acquisition opportunities. The way they were talking didn't sound like casual curiosity. Maria's weathered hand found mine across the table. Mija, I've known you since David was little. You don't deserve this treatment, especially from someone you've welcomed into your family. Their support was comforting, but it also confirmed that the disrespect wasn't subtle enough to escape notice from other guests. People were talking, wondering why the hostess and mother of the groom had been hidden away like an embarrassment. My humiliation was becoming a topic of conversation at my own son's wedding. As I sat listening to their concerns, I began to notice other details I'd initially overlooked. The serving staff seemed unusually deferential to Jessica's family members, taking special requests and providing attentive service that suggested they'd received specific instructions about VIP treatment. Meanwhile, servers barely acknowledged our table, treating us like afterthoughts despite the fact that we were seated in their primary traffic path. The music selection also seemed deliberately chosen to favor Jessica's preferences over the playlist I'd helped create during our planning sessions. The traditional Mexican ballads I'd requested to honor Roberto's memory and our family heritage were nowhere to be heard, replaced by contemporary pop songs that held no personal significance for David or our family. Even the timing of speeches seemed to marginalize my role. Traditionally, the mother of the groom would be given an opportunity to speak during the dinner service. But the coordinator had informed me earlier that all speaking slots were filled by Jessica's family members and their friends. My 40 years of raising David as a single mother apparently didn't warrant acknowledgement during the formal program. Each detail might have been explainable individually, but together they painted a picture of systematic exclusion. Jessica hadn't just made poor decisions about seating arrangements. She'd orchestrated an entire event designed to minimize my presence and significance while elevating her own family's prominence. The realization was both infuriating and clarifying. I'd spent months interpreting Jessica's behavior through the lens of someone learning to navigate family dynamics, giving her the benefit of the doubt when questions arose about her motivations or judgment. Now I could see that every seemingly innocent inquiry about my business, every suggestion about event planning, every comment about family roles had been building toward this moment of public diminishment. During the salad course, I excused myself to use the restroom, but instead made my way to the kitchen area, where I could observe the staff operations and gather more information about how the event was being managed. The catering coordinator, Michelle, looked surprised to see me in the service area. Sophia, is everything all right? Do you need something from the kitchen? I wanted to check on how things are going and see if you need any assistance, I replied, watching the efficient choreography of servers preparing for the main course service. Michelle's expression grew thoughtful. Actually, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to ask about some of the service instructions we received. We were told that Jessica's family should receive priority attention and that certain tables, including yours, were lower priority for service timing. The information hit me like a physical blow. Not only had Jessica positioned me in an inferior location, but she'd also instructed the staff to provide substandard service to my table. The humiliation was intentional and comprehensive, designed to make my exclusion obvious to anyone paying attention. Who gave you those instructions? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Jessica provided a detailed service protocol when we finalized the catering arrangements last week. She said it was based on family preferences and logistical considerations. Last week, while I'd been focused on final details like flower arrangements and photographer schedules, Jessica had been quietly restructuring the service protocols to ensure my marginalization would be seamlessly executed. The level of planning and deception was staggering. Michelle, I need you to understand something important, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed through decades of managing construction crews. I am the hostess of this event, the mother of the groom, and the person whose home and resources are making this wedding possible. Any service protocols that treat me as secondary priority are unacceptable and should be immediately corrected. Michelle's eyes widened as she absorbed the implications of what I was telling her. Sophia, I had no idea there was confusion about the family hierarchy. Of course we'll adjust the service protocols immediately. Thank you. And Michelle, I'd like you to keep track of any other special instructions you received that might be inconsistent with standard wedding service practices. As I walked back through the reception area, I began to notice guests from Jessica's side watching me with expressions that seemed more curious than friendly. Their attention felt calculated, as if they were studying my reactions to gauge how successfully their plan was proceeding. Near the bar, I encountered Jessica's father, Richard, a distinguished man in his early 60s who'd been cordial but distant during our previous meetings. His greeting confirmed my growing suspicions about the coordinated nature of Jessica's behavior. "Sophia, wonderful party," he said, his tone polite but lacking warmth. "Jessica tells us you're thinking about scaling back your business operations. Smart move at your age. Time to let the younger generation take over the heavy lifting." I hadn't discussed any plans to scale back my business with Jessica or anyone else. Martinez Construction was thriving, and I had no intention of reducing my involvement in the company I'd built from nothing. Richard's comment revealed that Jessica had been sharing fictional narratives about my supposed plans, probably to support whatever larger agenda her family was pursuing. "I'm not sure where Jessica got that impression," I replied carefully. "Martinez Construction is expanding, not scaling back. We're busier than we've ever been." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, at your age, you have to be realistic about what you can handle. Business management is stressful, especially in construction. Maybe it's time to consider selling to someone who can really maximize the potential." The suggestion was delivered casually, but the underlying message was clear. Jessica's family saw my business as an asset to be acquired, not a legacy to be respected. Their interest in property values and development potential during cocktail hour suddenly made perfect sense. "Martinez Construction isn't for sale," I said firmly. "It's a family business that I plan to pass down to David." Of course, Richard replied, but his expression suggested he viewed my plans as naive rather than definitive. "David's a bright young man, but he might prefer to cash out and pursue other opportunities. Young people today aren't always interested in continuing their parents' businesses." The conversation was revealing more than Richard probably intended. Jessica's family had clearly discussed strategies for acquiring my business assets, possibly with David's cooperation or without his knowledge. The wedding wasn't just a celebration of love, it was a business transaction disguised as a family event. Returning to my table, I found the main course had been served to other tables while ours remained empty. The deliberate delay in service was exactly the kind of subtle humiliation that Jessica had orchestrated, designed to make my inferior status obvious without creating a scene that might disturb the overall celebration. Maria looked indignant as servers passed our table repeatedly without stopping. "This is ridiculous, Sophia. We're being treated like we crashed the party instead of being invited guests." I signaled to one of the servers, who reluctantly approached our table. "Excuse me, but when might we expect to receive our dinner service?" The young woman looked uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but we were told this table was on a delayed service schedule. I can check with the coordinator about timing." "Please do that," I replied, my voice carrying enough authority to make her hurry toward the kitchen. While we waited, I used the time to systematically review everything I'd observed since arriving at the reception. The seating arrangements, the service protocols, the family conversations about my business, the marginalization of my role in the formal program. All of it pointed to a coordinated effort to establish Jessica's family as the dominant force while reducing me to a peripheral figure. The pattern was sophisticated enough to suggest professional planning, possibly involving people with experience in corporate acquisitions or hostile takeovers. Jessica might be young, but her family clearly had resources and expertise that went beyond social event planning. My phone buzzed with a text message from my brother Miguel, who was seated across the room at another marginalized table. "Something's wrong here, Sophia. Come find me when you can." Miguel's message confirmed that I wasn't the only family member who'd been deliberately positioned away from the main celebration. Whatever Jessica had planned involved isolating my entire side of the family while elevating her own relatives to positions of prominence and influence. The server returned with our delayed dinners, her apology half-hearted and clearly scripted. As we finally began eating, I continued to observe the room dynamics and plan my response to what was obviously a calculated attack on my position within my own family. Jessica had made several critical miscalculations in her strategy. First, she'd underestimated my intelligence and business experience, assuming that age and gender would make me an easy target for manipulation. Second, she'd been too obvious in her marginalization tactics, creating evidence that could be documented, and witnesses who could corroborate my concerns. Third, she'd failed to secure David's conscious cooperation, meaning her lies about my supposed preferences could be easily exposed. Most importantly, she'd chosen to wage this battle in my own home, surrounded by my own employees and longtime friends, in a venue where I held all the practical power and authority. The young woman who thought she could outsmart a construction company owner on her own territory was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between social manipulation and real-world consequences. As I finished my delayed dinner and prepared for the next phase of my response, I felt the same cold determination that had carried me through every major challenge in building Martinez Construction. Jessica had started a war she couldn't possibly win, and the time for polite restraint was rapidly approaching its end. The evening was young, the guests were still celebrating, and the perfect opportunity for my response was still ahead. But when that moment came, Jessica and her family would discover that 40 years of business experience had taught me exactly how to handle people who mistook kindness for weakness and respect for vulnerability. They wanted a hostile takeover. They were about to get a masterclass in why you never underestimate a woman who built an empire from nothing and had everything to fight for. The dessert course was being served when I made my decision. Jessica's family had spent the entire evening treating me like an unwelcome guest at my own son's wedding, and their whispered conversations about property acquisitions and business opportunities had grown increasingly bold. They clearly believed they'd successfully marginalized me, reducing my role to that of a confused elderly woman whose opinions could be safely ignored. They were about to discover how wrong they were. I excused myself from table 47, where Maria and the other guests were sharing their outrage about the treatment we'd received. My movements were deliberate and purposeful as I walked toward the small stage area where the DJ had set up his equipment. The music was currently a soft instrumental piece that provided background ambiance for conversation, but that was about to change. "Excuse me," I said to the DJ, a young man named Marcus, whom I'd hired for several corporate events. He recognized me immediately and removed his headphones. "Mrs. Martinez, how's the reception going? Everything sounds great from up here." "Marcus, I need you to cut the music and give me access to the microphone. I have an announcement to make." His expression grew uncertain. "Should I check with the bride first?" Usually the wedding coordinator handles all the announcement timing. "Marcus, I'm the hostess of this event, the mother of the groom, and the person who hired you. I don't need anyone's permission to address my guests in my own home." The authority in my voice left no room for argument. Marcus nodded and began adjusting his equipment while I smoothed my emerald dress and mentally rehearsed what I was about to say. Across the reception hall, I could see Jessica laughing with her family, completely unaware that her carefully orchestrated humiliation was about to backfire spectacularly. The music faded to silence, and Marcus handed me the wireless microphone. The sudden quiet caught the attention of guests throughout the room, conversations gradually dying as people turned toward the stage area. I could see David at the head table, his expression curious but not yet concerned. Jessica's smile remained bright, probably assuming I was about to deliver the traditional mother of the groom toast that had been omitted from the formal program. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "For those who don't know me, I'm Sophia Martinez, David's mother and your hostess for this beautiful celebration." Polite applause rippled through the room. Jessica's family members were smiling and nodding, still believing they controlled the narrative of this evening. Their expressions were about to change dramatically. "I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate David and Jessica's marriage. As a mother, there's nothing more important than seeing your child find happiness and love. David deserves all the joy in the world, and I've hoped that Jessica would be the partner who helps him achieve that joy." I paused, allowing the warm sentiment to settle before shifting the tone of my remarks. David was beaming at the head table, touched by what he thought was going to be a heartfelt maternal blessing. Jessica's smile was still perfectly in place, but something in her posture suggested she was beginning to sense that this speech might not follow the script she'd expected. However, I've learned something important tonight about the difference between love and manipulation, between building a family and executing a business transaction. Some lessons are painful, but they're necessary for protecting the people we care about most. The room was completely silent now, the festive atmosphere replaced by tension, as guests realized this wasn't going to be a conventional wedding toast. I could see confusion spreading across faces throughout the reception hall, people trying to understand where this announcement was heading. You see, I've spent the last 40 years building Martinez Construction from nothing into one of Riverside's most successful companies. That experience taught me how to recognize when someone is trying to deceive me, manipulate me, or steal from me. Tonight, I've seen all three of those things happening at my own son's wedding. Gasps and murmurs erupted from various tables. David's expression shifted from confusion to alarm, while Jessica's mask finally began to slip, revealing something much colder underneath her bridal smile. Let me share some interesting facts about this evening's celebration. First, despite being the mother of the groom and the hostess of this event, I was deliberately seated behind the kitchen, in a location where I would be hidden from view and unable to participate meaningfully in my son's wedding reception. I gestured toward table 47, where Maria and the others were nodding vigorously in support. When I questioned this seating arrangement, I was told that I had specifically requested to be positioned where I could oversee catering operations. That was a lie. I made no such request. Jessica stood up abruptly from the head table, her voice carrying across the room without amplification. Sophia, I think there's been a misunderstanding. This isn't the appropriate time or place for this kind of discussion. Her attempt to regain control of the situation only strengthened my resolve. You're absolutely right, Jessica. This isn't the appropriate place for lies and manipulation. But since you chose to stage your deception here, this is where it will be exposed. David was on his feet now, his face pale with confusion and dawning horror. Mom, what's going on? What are you talking about? I looked at my son with all the love and protection I'd felt for him since the day he was born. David, I'm talking about the fact that your wife and her family have spent this entire evening treating me like an unwelcome guest while discussing plans to acquire my business and property. The accusation sent shockwaves through the room. Jessica's father, Richard, stood up at his table, his voice carrying the aggressive tone of someone accustomed to intimidating opponents. Those are serious allegations, Sophia. I hope you have evidence to support such claims. I smiled at him with the same confidence I'd shown to countless contractors who tried to cheat me over the years. Richard, I have 40 years of experience dealing with people who think they can outsmart me. Did you really believe I wouldn't notice when your family spent cocktail hour interrogating my guests about property values and development opportunities? Turning back to address the entire room, I continued my systematic dismantling of Jessica's carefully constructed facade. I was also informed by the catering staff that they received special instructions to provide inferior service to certain tables, including mine, while giving priority treatment to Jessica's family. This wasn't about logistics or space management. This was about establishing a hierarchy that put me at the bottom. Michelle, the catering coordinator, was standing near the kitchen entrance, and she nodded when several guests turned to look at her. Her confirmation of my statements sent another wave of shocked murmurs through the reception hall. But the most revealing conversation happened when Richard suggested that I should sell my business because I'm too old to handle the stress of construction management. He seemed remarkably well informed about my company's value and development potential for someone who's supposedly just interested in getting to know his new in-laws. Jessica's composure was completely shattered now, her perfect bridal facade replaced by something desperate and calculating. David, your mother is obviously confused and upset. The stress of planning this wedding has been overwhelming for her. Maybe we should continue this conversation privately. Her attempt to portray me as confused and unreliable was exactly the tactic I'd expected, and I was ready for it. Jessica, the only thing I'm confused about is how you thought you could manipulate my son and steal my life's work without me noticing. Did you really believe that 40 years of business experience wouldn't prepare me to recognize a hostile takeover when I saw one? David's voice cracked with emotion as he addressed his new wife. Jessica, is this true? Did you deliberately humiliate my mother? Have you and your family been planning to take over her business? The moment of truth had arrived. Jessica could continue lying, but the evidence was overwhelming and the witnesses were numerous. Her family's behavior throughout the evening had been too obvious, too coordinated to deny. She was trapped by her own arrogance and poor planning. "David, sweetheart, business is complicated," Jessica began, her voice taking on a patronizing tone that revealed her true feelings about my son's intelligence. "Your mother has built something valuable, but she's not going to live forever. We were just trying to help you understand your options for maximizing your inheritance." The admission was everything I'd needed to prove my case. Jessica had just confirmed that she viewed my death as a business opportunity, and my son as too naive to understand his own interests without her guidance. David's face went white with shock and disgust. "Maximize my inheritance?" "Jessica, that's my mother you're talking about. She's not a business asset to be liquidated." But Jessica was too far down this path to retreat now. Her mask was completely gone, replaced by the calculating coldness I'd glimpsed throughout the evening. "David, be realistic. You're 28 years old. Do you really want to spend the next 20 years taking orders from your mother? This is your chance to build your own life, to have real financial freedom." The room was deadly silent as guests witnessed the complete destruction of the sweet, devoted daughter-in-law persona Jessica had maintained for 2 years. In her desperation to justify her actions, she'd revealed her true feelings about David, about me, and about the family she'd pretended to want to join. "You see, David," I said gently, my heart breaking for my son even as I felt vindicated by Jessica's confession. "This was never about love or building a life together. This was about money, property, and control. You were just the means to an end." David's voice was barely a whisper, but the microphone picked up his words clearly. "Jessica, did you ever love me? Or was this all just a way to get to my mother's business?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Jessica's silence was more damning than any answer she could have given. Her inability to immediately and emphatically declare her love for David told everyone in the room everything they needed to know about her true motivations. "David, of course I love you," she finally said, but the words sounded hollow and rehearsed. "This doesn't change how I feel about you. It's just business. Just business." The phrase that confirmed every suspicion I'd harbored about Jessica's character and intentions. She had just reduced her marriage to my son to a commercial transaction, confirming that her affection had always been conditional on access to financial gain. I stepped closer to the microphone, addressing the room with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to protect. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is why I'm making this announcement publicly. My son deserves to know the truth about the woman he married, and my family deserves to understand what we're really dealing with." Looking directly at Jessica, I delivered the statement I'd been building toward all evening. "Jessica, you made a fundamental error in your planning. You assumed that age would make me weak, that kindness would make me naive, and that my love for David would make me willing to accept any treatment in order to avoid causing him pain." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over the room. "You were wrong on all counts. I am not weak, I am not naive, and my love for my son includes protecting him from people who would use and manipulate him for financial gain." The silence in the room was deafening. Jessica's family members were looking at each other with expressions ranging from embarrassment to anger, clearly realizing that their carefully planned strategy had not only failed, but had been publicly exposed in the most humiliating way possible. "Furthermore," I continued, "since this celebration is taking place in my home, using my resources, and funded by my generosity, I think it's appropriate to clarify some facts about the future. Martinez Construction will never be sold to Jessica's family or anyone else who views it as an acquisition opportunity rather than a family legacy." Richard stood up again, his face red with anger. "Sophia, you're making a serious mistake. You're embarrassing your son and destroying his marriage over business paranoia." I smiled at him with the same confidence that had intimidated competitors for 4 decades. "Richard, the only mistake I made was trusting your daughter with my family's welfare. As for embarrassing David, I think Jessica handled that quite effectively when she admitted that she views our family as a business opportunity." David had been standing silently throughout this exchange, his wedding tuxedo a stark contrast to the devastation on his face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a strength I hadn't heard since he was a child defending himself against playground bullies. "Jessica, I want you to leave. Now. This marriage is over before it even began." The declaration sent shockwaves through the room. Jessica's confident facade crumbled completely as she realized that her manipulation had not only failed but had cost her everything she'd worked to achieve. "David, please, let's talk about this privately. You're letting your mother turn you against me. Can't you see what she's doing?" But David was no longer the confused young man who'd been manipulated by competing narratives. The truth about Jessica's character and motivations was now clear, and he was responding with the strength and integrity I'd tried to instill in him throughout his childhood. "No, Jessica, I can see exactly what you've been doing. You used me to get access to my mother's business, you humiliated her at our wedding, and you just admitted that you view my family as a financial opportunity. I won't be married to someone who treats the people I love that way." Jessica's desperation was palpable as she realized that her carefully constructed plan was collapsing in real time. "David, you're making a huge mistake. Your mother is manipulating you, just like I said she would. She can't stand the idea of sharing you with another woman." The accusation was Jessica's final attempt to salvage the situation, but it only confirmed how little she understood about the bond between David and me. Our relationship had always been built on mutual respect and genuine care, not the possessiveness and control she was projecting. "Jessica," David said with finality, "the only person who's been manipulating me is you. I want you and your family to leave my mother's property immediately." The confrontation had reached its climax, and the results were exactly what I'd hoped for when I decided to expose Jessica's true nature publicly. My son was free from a manipulative relationship, my family's assets were protected from a hostile acquisition attempt, and the truth about Jessica's character was now a matter of public record. As security personnel began moving toward Jessica's table to escort her family from the premises, I felt the same satisfaction I'd experienced after winning difficult business negotiations or completing challenging construction projects. This hadn't been about revenge or personal vindication. This had been about protecting my family and preserving the legacy I'd built for David's future. The room remained silent as Jessica and her family gathered their belongings and prepared to leave. The fairy tale wedding they'd envisioned as the first step in acquiring my business empire had become a public humiliation that would follow them for years to come. As I watched them walk toward the exit, I realized that this confrontation had accomplished something even more important than exposing their deception. It had shown David exactly what kind of strength and intelligence he'd inherited from his mother, and what kind of legacy he was truly part of. The empire I'd built wasn't just about money or property. It was about integrity, loyalty, and the courage to fight for what mattered most. The silence that followed Jessica's departure was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. 200 guests sat frozen in their chairs, processing what they'd just witnessed. The fairy tale wedding had transformed into something resembling a courtroom drama, complete with confessions, revelations, and consequences that would ripple through multiple families for years to come. David stood alone at the head table, still wearing his wedding tuxedo, but looking like a man who'd aged a decade in the span of an hour. My heart ached for him, even as I felt relief that he'd been freed from Jessica's manipulation before it could cause irreparable damage to his life and our family's legacy. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said into the microphone, my voice carrying the measured tone I'd used to address investors during difficult board meetings. "I apologize that you've had to witness such unpleasant revelations during what should have been a joyous celebration. However, sometimes the truth requires an audience to be fully understood and believed." A guest near the front, someone I recognized as David's former college roommate, raised his hand tentatively. "Mrs. Martinez, what happens now? I mean, with the marriage and everything?" It was a fair question that deserved an honest answer. The marriage, such as it was, is over. David has made his choice based on the evidence he's seen tonight. As for what happens next, that depends on what we discover about the full extent of Jessica's deception. My brother Miguel approached the stage, his weathered face showing a mixture of pride and concern. At 71, Miguel had the kind of wisdom that came from surviving decades as a ranch foreman in Texas, dealing with all manner of human nature and business corruption. "Sophia," he said, his voice carrying clearly without amplification, I've been watching and listening all evening. There's more to this than just tonight's humiliation. Do you want me to tell everyone what I overheard during cocktail hour? I nodded, knowing that Miguel's observations would provide crucial context for understanding the scope of Jessica's planning. My brother had spent 40 years managing ranch operations, which required the ability to detect deception, assess character, and protect valuable assets from those who would steal them. During the cocktail reception, Miguel began, addressing the room with the authority of someone accustomed to commanding attention. I heard Jessica's uncle discussing specific details about Sophia's construction contracts with the city. He knew about projects that haven't been publicly announced yet, information that could only have come from someone with access to confidential business documents. This revelation sent a new wave of shock through the assembled guests. Access to confidential contract information suggested that Jessica's infiltration of my business had gone much deeper than I'd realized. She hadn't just been asking casual questions about my operations, she'd been conducting industrial espionage. Miguel continued, I also heard Richard talking to another man about something called accelerated acquisition protocols and how they'd need to, quote, expedite the transition timeline now that certain family dynamics had been established. The business terminology was chilling in its implications. Jessica's family hadn't just been interested in eventually inheriting my assets through David, they'd been planning an active takeover that would have displaced me from my own company while I was still alive. David's voice cracked with emotion as he addressed the room. I gave Jessica access to my mother's home office several times over the past few months. She said she wanted to understand the family business, so she could be supportive. I thought I was helping her feel more included. The admission confirmed my worst fears about how Jessica had gained access to confidential information. My son's trust and desire to share his family legacy with the woman he loved had been weaponized against both of us. Jessica had systematically exploited David's openness to gather intelligence for what was essentially a corporate raid. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a family friend who'd known David since childhood and happened to be a forensic accountant, stood up from her table near the back of the room. Sophia, if what we're hearing is accurate, this could constitute fraud, identity theft, and possibly conspiracy. Have you considered involving law enforcement? The suggestion hadn't occurred to me in the heat of the moment, but Elena's expertise made her recommendation worth considering seriously. If Jessica had been accessing confidential business documents and sharing that information with family members who were planning a hostile acquisition, criminal charges might be appropriate. Elena, what would that process involve? I asked, genuinely curious about the legal implications of what had been revealed tonight. Well, unauthorized access to business documents, especially if they were used to facilitate financial gain, could violate several federal statutes. The conspiracy aspect becomes relevant if multiple family members were coordinating their actions with criminal intent. Carmen, my longtime housekeeper and friend, approached the stage with a manila folder in her hands. Her expression was grim, and I could see she was carrying something important. Sophia, Mija, I need to show you something I found in the guest room where Jessica was getting ready earlier today. She handed me the folder, and as I opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside were photocopied pages from my private financial records, including bank statements, property valuations, and confidential client contracts. There were also handwritten notes in Jessica's distinctive handwriting, detailing estimated values for different aspects of my business and property holdings. Carmen, where exactly did you find this? Hidden in her makeup case. I was cleaning up after the bridal party left for the ceremony and noticed papers sticking out. I thought they might be important wedding documents that got misplaced, but when I looked closer, I realized they were copies of your private business records. I held up the folder so the guests could see it, though I was careful not to reveal any specific financial information. Ladies and gentlemen, this folder contains copies of confidential documents from my personal files. Carmen found them in Jessica's possession just hours ago. The physical evidence of Jessica's theft and espionage sent a collective gasp through the room. David's face had gone completely pale as he realized the full extent of his ex-wife's betrayal. Maria Santos, my elderly neighbor who'd been seated at the marginalized table with me, stood up slowly, her voice carrying despite her age. Sophia, there's something else you need to know. I didn't want to worry you before the wedding, but Jessica came to my house 3 times in the past month, asking questions about your health, your daily routines, and whether you'd ever discussed selling the business. This information hit me like a physical blow. Jessica hadn't just been gathering financial intelligence. She'd been conducting surveillance on my personal life, possibly looking for signs of vulnerability or opportunities to accelerate whatever timeline her family had established for their acquisition plan. What kind of questions was she asking, Maria? She wanted to know if you'd seemed forgetful lately, if you'd had any health scares, if you'd mentioned feeling overwhelmed by business responsibilities. She said she was concerned about you and wanted to make sure you were getting the support you needed. The pattern was becoming clear and deeply disturbing. Jessica had been systematically building a case for my supposed incompetence or declining health, probably as justification for David to assume control of the business, or for her family to intervene in my affairs. Detective Ray Morrison, who'd been attending the wedding as a family friend rather than in any official capacity, approached the stage with the measured gait of someone accustomed to investigating complex criminal conspiracies. Sophia, I've been listening to everything that's been revealed tonight, and I think Elena is right about law enforcement involvement. What we're hearing sounds like a coordinated effort to commit multiple felonies, including identity theft, fraud, and possibly conspiracy to commit elder abuse. The term elder abuse sent a chill through the room. While I'd never thought of myself as elderly or vulnerable, the legal definition might apply to Jessica's attempt to manipulate and exploit someone in their late 60s for financial gain. Detective Morrison continued, the surveillance activities Maria described, combined with the stolen documents and the coordinated family effort to acquire your business assets, suggest a level of planning and criminal intent that goes well beyond a family dispute. David's friend Alex, who worked as a cybersecurity consultant, raised his hand. Mrs. Martinez, did Jessica ever have access to your computer systems or online business accounts? The question opened up an entirely new dimension of potential criminal activity. She used my computer several times when she was here for wedding planning. I assumed she was researching vendors or managing RSVPs. Alex's expression grew grave. With physical access to your computer and knowledge of your business operations, she could have installed monitoring software, copied files, or even gained access to your online banking and business accounts. We should have your systems forensically examined. The scope of Jessica's potential criminal activity was expanding with each revelation. What had started as rude behavior at a wedding reception was revealing itself as a sophisticated, multi-layered attack on my personal and professional life. Detective Morrison pulled out his phone. Sophia, I'm going to call this in and request a forensic accounting team and cybersecurity specialists. If what we're uncovering tonight is accurate, this case could involve federal charges and multiple jurisdictions. As the detective made his calls, I found myself surrounded by family and friends offering support, information, and expertise. The humiliation Jessica had intended to inflict on me had instead mobilized an entire community of people who cared about my welfare and wanted to help protect me from further harm. Dr. Patricia Chen, a family physician who'd been treating me for years, approached with her own concerns. Sophia, I need to ask you something important. In recent months, did Jessica ever suggest that you seemed confused, forgetful, or unable to handle your business responsibilities? Actually, yes. She made several comments about my needing to consider retiring or reducing my workload. She said she was worried about the stress affecting my health. Dr. Chen's expression grew troubled. That's a common tactic in elder financial abuse cases. The perpetrator plants seeds of doubt about the victim's mental capacity to justify taking control of their affairs. Combined with the surveillance activities and document theft, it suggests a very sophisticated operation. The clinical assessment was both validating and terrifying. Jessica hadn't just been rude or greedy. She'd been executing a textbook case of elder financial abuse using methods that suggested professional knowledge or consultation with experts in exploitation. Miguel approached me with his phone in hand. Sophia, I just called our cousin Roberto, who works for the FBI Financial Crimes Division in Dallas. He's driving here, tonight, and will arrive in the morning. He said what we're describing sounds like a pattern he's seen in organized fraud operations. The involvement of federal law enforcement elevated the seriousness of the situation to levels I hadn't anticipated. What had begun as my attempt to expose Jessica's rudeness and manipulation was revealing criminal activity that required professional investigation and prosecution. As the evening progressed and more information emerged from guests who'd observed suspicious behavior or overheard incriminating conversations, the full scope of Jessica's planning became clear. This hadn't been a spontaneous attempt to humiliate me or a simple case of greed. This had been a carefully orchestrated long-term operation designed to systematically strip me of my assets, my business, and my independence. The wedding reception that was supposed to celebrate David's happiness had instead become the scene where a criminal conspiracy was exposed, documented, and reported to law enforcement. Jessica's arrogance and poor planning had led her to execute her scheme in front of 200 witnesses, creating an evidentiary record that would make prosecution relatively straightforward. As I looked around at the faces of people who'd rallied to support me and protect our family, I felt a mixture of gratitude and determination. The battle was far from over, but tonight had proven that Jessica had seriously underestimated both my intelligence and the strength of the community that surrounded me. The investigation that would follow would likely reveal even more disturbing details about the scope of Jessica's criminal activity. But for now, the immediate threat had been neutralized, my son had been freed from a manipulative relationship, and the truth about Jessica's character and intentions was a matter of public record. 6 months after what the Riverside Gazette dubbed the wedding that exposed a criminal empire, I stood in the conference room of the FBI field office in Los Angeles, watching as federal prosecutors outlined the charges they would be filing against Jessica Martinez and 12 members of her extended family. The scope of their criminal operation had far exceeded anything we'd imagined that October evening, when I'd taken the microphone at my son's wedding. Agent Rebecca Torres spread photographs and documents across the mahogany conference table, each piece of evidence representing another victim of what prosecutors were calling the Martinez Family Crime Organization. The irony of sharing a surname with these criminals wasn't lost on me, though their corruption bore no resemblance to the values Roberto and I had instilled in our legitimate Martinez legacy. Mrs. Martinez, Agent Torres began, using my married name to distinguish me from the defendants, your decision to expose Jessica publicly at the wedding reception provided us with the break we needed in a 3-year investigation. Without your courage and documentation, we might never have connected all these cases. The investigation had revealed that Jessica's attempt to steal my business was part of a systematic operation targeting wealthy elderly individuals across Southern California. Her family had perfected a formula of infiltration, surveillance, document theft, and psychological manipulation designed to transfer assets from vulnerable seniors to their criminal enterprise. David sat beside me at the conference table, his transformation over the past 6 months as dramatic as anything I'd experienced in my own life. The naive young man who'd been manipulated by a beautiful woman's lies had evolved into a fierce protector of our family's interests and a passionate advocate for elder abuse prevention. "Mom," he said quietly, his hand finding mine across the polished wood surface, "I still can't believe I brought that criminal into our home, gave her access to everything you'd worked so hard to build." I squeezed his hand, feeling the calluses he'd developed since taking a more active role in Martinez construction. David's guilt over his role in Jessica's infiltration had motivated him to immerse himself completely in understanding our business operations, learning every aspect of the company, from equipment maintenance to client relations. "David, you couldn't have known. Jessica and her family were sophisticated criminals who'd perfected their deception over years of practice. The FBI says they'd successfully targeted at least 15 other families before attempting to victimize us." Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh opened a thick file folder containing victim impact statements from elderly individuals who'd lost homes, businesses, and life savings to the Martinez Family Crime Organization. The stories were heartbreaking testimonies of trust betrayed, families destroyed, and legacies stolen by people who specialized in exploiting the kindness and vulnerability of aging parents and grandparents. "Sophia, your case is unique because you recognized the threat and fought back before they could complete their theft," Prosecutor Walsh explained. "Most of their victims didn't realize what was happening until it was too late to recover their assets." The photographs showed elderly men and women who'd been left destitute after Jessica's relatives had systematically drained their bank accounts, sold their properties, and liquidated their investments. Some had been placed in substandard care facilities after being declared incompetent by corrupt medical professionals who were part of the conspiracy. Dr. Margaret Holloway, the psychiatrist Jessica's family had planned to use for my competency evaluation, was among those facing federal charges. The investigation had revealed that she'd provided fraudulent mental health assessments for dozens of elderly individuals, declaring them incompetent so their families could assume control of their finances. The Martinez organization operated like a corporation, Agent Torres continued, pointing to an organizational chart that looked more like a business structure than a criminal conspiracy. Jessica was essentially a field operative who identified and infiltrated target families. Her parents and uncles handled the financial aspects, while corrupt professionals provided the legal and medical cover they needed to complete their thefts. The sophistication of their operation explained how they'd nearly succeeded in stealing my life's work. This wasn't the impulsive greed of a young woman with gambling debts. This was organized crime masquerading as family concern and romantic love. Carmen, who'd discovered the stolen documents in Jessica's makeup case, had become something of a local hero in Riverside's Latino community. Her vigilance and courage in preserving evidence had been crucial to the federal prosecution, and she'd been invited to speak at community events about recognizing and preventing elder abuse. Mrs. Martinez, she'd told a church gathering the previous month, taught me that standing up for what's right isn't about age or education or money. It's about having the courage to protect the people you love when they're being threatened. The ripple effects of that October evening had transformed our entire community's awareness of elder abuse and financial exploitation. Martinez Construction had established a nonprofit foundation dedicated to educating seniors about protecting themselves from fraudulent schemes, and David had become a passionate spokesperson for the cause. Detective Ray Morrison, who'd coordinated the initial criminal investigation, had used our case as a model for training law enforcement officers throughout California about recognizing complex elder abuse operations. His presentation to the State Attorney General's conference had resulted in new protocols for investigating financial crimes against seniors. The Martinez wedding case demonstrates why we need to take family member exploitation more seriously, Detective Morrison had told the conference. These aren't isolated incidents of greed. They're often part of organized criminal enterprises that specifically target successful, independent elderly individuals. The legal proceedings had also revealed the full extent of Jessica's surveillance activities in my neighborhood. Security camera footage from nearby homes showed her conducting regular reconnaissance of my property, photographing my daily routines, and timing my business meetings to determine optimal windows for accessing my home office. Maria Santos, my elderly neighbor who'd been questioned by Jessica about my health and habits, had become an unexpected advocate for community vigilance. At 74, she'd organized a neighborhood watch program specifically focused on identifying potential elder abuse situations. "We protect each other now," Maria explained to a reporter from the Los Angeles Times. Sophia showed us that being old doesn't mean being helpless, and that criminals who target seniors need to know that our community won't tolerate it. The financial impact of Jessica's attempted theft had been staggering. Forensic accountants estimated that her family's complete plan would have resulted in the loss of approximately $2.8 million in assets, including my business, properties, and personal investments. The money would have been laundered through fake investment schemes and offshore accounts that had been used to hide proceeds from their other victims. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the forensic accountant who'd identified the criminal implications at the wedding reception, had volunteered her services to help other victims of the Martinez organization recover their stolen assets. Her pro bono work had resulted in the recovery of over $4 million for elderly victims who'd lost their life savings. Sophia's case proved that these criminals can be defeated when communities work together and refuse to be silent, Dr. Vasquez told a gathering of financial professionals. The key is recognizing the warning signs early and having the courage to act on what you observe. The cybersecurity investigation of my computer systems had revealed the full scope of Jessica's digital espionage. She'd installed sophisticated monitoring software that tracked my keystrokes, captured screenshots of confidential documents, and provided her family with real-time access to my business communications. Alex, David's friend who'd identified the cybersecurity concerns, had used our case to develop new security protocols for small businesses owned by seniors. His company now offered specialized services to help elderly entrepreneurs protect themselves from digital infiltration by family members or caregivers with malicious intent. The Martinez case showed us that traditional cybersecurity isn't enough when the threat comes from inside the family, Alex explained during a presentation to the Small Business Administration. We need specific protocols for protecting against intimate partner or family member exploitation. The most satisfying aspect of the resolution had been watching David's transformation from victim to advocate. His initial devastation over Jessica's betrayal had evolved into passionate commitment to preventing similar crimes against other families. My mother built something incredible through 40 years of hard work and determination, David told a congressional committee investigating elder financial abuse. I almost let criminals destroy that legacy because I was naive about the people I trusted. Now I'm dedicated to making sure other families don't experience what we went through. David's testimony had contributed to new federal legislation, strengthening penalties for elder financial abuse, and requiring additional oversight of caregivers and family members who assume control of elderly individuals' finances. The Willowbrook Gardens wedding venue, where our family's crisis had unfolded so publicly, had implemented new security protocols based on lessons learned from our experience. They now required background checks for anyone requesting detailed access to venue operations and maintain closer surveillance of suspicious behavior during events. The Martinez wedding taught us that criminals can use any setting to advance their schemes, venue manager Patricia Williams explained. We have a responsibility to protect our clients from exploitation, even when it comes from their own family members. Miguel, my brother, who'd provided crucial observations about Jessica's family's suspicious conversations, had returned to Texas with a new mission of educating rural communities about elder financial abuse. His presentations to ranchers and agricultural workers had helped identify several similar schemes targeting elderly landowners. City criminals think rural people are easy targets because we're isolated and trusting, Miguel told a gathering of Texas cattle ranchers. But Sophia proved that country strength and city smarts can defeat any criminal who underestimates their victims. As for me, the experience had transformed my understanding of my own capabilities and responsibilities. At 68, I'd discovered reserves of courage and strategic thinking that I hadn't accessed since the early days of building Martinez construction. The woman who'd stood up to discriminatory contractors and demanding city officials was still very much alive, and she wasn't going to be quietly pushed aside by anyone. The nonprofit foundation David and I had established was expanding beyond elder abuse prevention into broader advocacy for seniors who wanted to remain active in their businesses and communities. We'd helped dozens of elderly entrepreneurs develop security protocols, succession planning, and family communication strategies designed to prevent exploitation. Being older doesn't mean being weaker, I told a conference of women business owners. Experience and wisdom are assets that criminals try to turn against us, but they can also be our greatest weapons for fighting back. The case had officially concluded with Jessica receiving a 15-year federal prison sentence for her role in the conspiracy. Her parents and uncles received similar sentences, while Dr. Holloway and other professional enablers faced additional charges related to their corruption of legitimate medical and legal processes. Standing in my redesigned home office, now equipped with state-of-the-art security systems and surrounded by framed newspaper articles documenting our victory over the criminal conspiracy, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The legacy I'd built through decades of hard work had not only survived Jessica's attack, but had grown stronger as a result of the experience. David knocked on my office door, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the confident smile of someone who'd discovered his own strength through adversity. Mom, the documentary crew is here for the final interview. Are you ready to finish telling our story? The HBO documentary about our case would air next month, providing a national platform for educating people about elder financial abuse and demonstrating that seniors could fight back effectively against sophisticated criminal operations. I'm ready, I replied, straightening the emerald dress I'd worn to his wedding, the same dress I'd chosen for this final interview. Let's make sure everyone understands that getting older doesn't mean getting weaker, and that families who stick together can overcome any challenge. As we walked toward the living room where the camera crew was waiting, I reflected on the journey that had begun with a humiliating seating arrangement and had evolved into a nationwide movement for elder protection and empowerment. The wedding announcement I'd made that October evening had exposed more than just one family's criminal conspiracy. It had revealed the strength, intelligence, and determination that existed within communities of people who refused to be victimized by those who mistook kindness for weakness. Jessica had learned too late that the grandmother she'd tried to silence was not someone who would quietly disappear into the background. The woman who'd built an empire from nothing was not someone who would surrender that empire to criminals, regardless of how sophisticated their schemes or how convincing their lies. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.